This is the BreadWinner Podcast, hosted by entrepreneur, influencer, and sales wolf, Tyler Harris, bringing you the insights from the most successful forward-thinking entrepreneurs and influencers, so that you can rise to the top and make more dough.
Now, let's get into the show.
What is up, everybody? This is the BreadWinner Podcast. I am your host, Tyler Harris, and I am extremely happy to have a guest on the podcast today. It goes by the name Reezy. I asked him right before we got on here, man. I was like, hey, you want me to say your full name? And he said, nope, it's Reezy. And so that I love that. But I'm going to let him come on here, give you a little bit of intro to who he is. But I can just tell you, just off of his Instagram, it says over $4 million in lifetime Amazon sales. And man, I love this line right here, from food stamps to freedom. So we'll let him give a chance to introduce himself, let everybody know who you are. Reezy, man, appreciate you being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tyler. Appreciate it, man. So you got me, yeah?
Yes, sir.
We're good. I grew up super poor, food stamps, divorced parents, foster care at times, parents in jail, prison, drug addicted. And I just didn't have a lot growing up, right? I lived in hotels. I was homeless at times. And so at a very young age, I learned how to hustle and how to make my own way for a lot of reasons. Maybe I didn't want to go home sometimes. Sometimes I would go home and my dad wouldn't be there, or there would be no food or whatever. So I learned how to make money on my own at a very young age, say starting at like 10 years old or so that I could provide for myself and just make sure I had everything under control. One of my first hustles was I would go to apartment complexes and steal recyclables and then go push those like a mile to the recycling place, cash it in, and then I would take that money and buy bottled water and sodas, and then I would put ice in my backpack in a trash can after school, and I'd walk up and down the beach and sell water and sodas for $1 a piece.
That's awesome.
And I live by an amusement park. I live in Santa Cruz, California, so I still live where I grew up. So we have the Beach Boardwalk, which is a free admission amusement park. But obviously, if you don't have money, there's nothing you can do once you get in there. So you learn how to hustle the machines. You get a quarter. You know how to cheat the game to get 1,000 tickets. You sell those tickets to someone. There was just a ton of ways to make money. Later on, as I got older, I started learning more and more stuff. I always saw my dad. He would he's the type of dad that would pull over when he saw like a TV on the curb, and then he would fix it and, flip it. Of course, he was doing it for drug money, but I still, picked up the hustle off that. And when I was older, when I was like 12 years old, I sold drugs for a little while. Nothing serious, just a little bit of weed, but which is pretty normal where I live at in Santa Cruz. And so I learned a lot from that. I learned how to buy low and sell high. I learned how to recognize opportunities. I was also really neglected as a kid. So I was never concerned with like, what will someone think about me in this situation? Like I naturally became a good salesman because I knew that opportunities were not everywhere, at least for me at the time, and that they could be fleeting, and I had nothing to lose, right? So I became a good salesman. I was never scared to talk to girls, that type of thing. And as I got older, I ended up moving to Kansas from California for a while. I was a bad kid, and good thing because I met my wife there. And while I was in Kansas, like right before I dropped out of high school in 10th grade because I had a kid with my wife when I was 16 and got married and started living on my own at the same time. And right before then, I started selling on eBay, mostly because they were running TV commercials really hard. But a lot of the credit is due to my little brother, who was more in tune with the internet than I was. And this was like dial-up modem time, and when when people would call, if you were on the internet, your phone line would be busy all the time and no one could call you, or like someone would call you and it would disconnect your internet connection and you'd be all mad.
Oh, yeah.
I remember the only computer we had was a gateway computer that my mom maxed her credit card out to buy. And my brother started experimenting on eBay, and eventually we ended up selling everything in the house that my mom would let us sell. And we learned a lot of stuff. So like, I remember we sold his Nintendo, and we sold everything like in one auction. So the console, the games, the controllers, everything. And it went for a good amount of money, but we noticed that the guy who bought it, his name was like video game store guy or something like that. So we went and looked at what he was selling and what he had sold recently. And we're like, oh, wow, he sells just a controller, just a game, just a console. And so we learned that we could have made more money if we would have sold it individually. And that's when we learned about breaking bulk. And then we started buying off of eBay and selling back onto eBay, buying, lots of stuff and then cleaning them up and breaking it down into individual stuff. And that turned into flea markets and yard sales also. I was in Kansas, so obviously it was seasonal because it's like icy cold in the winter there. Yeah. But yeah, so I was really into eBay, and I had become an avid reader over time, even though I was never into books ever. But I got grounded so much as a kid that I eventually learned to love reading because it's the only thing you could do when you're grounded. And I remember when I realized I loved reading, I was like, ha ha ha, they don't know how much fun I'm having in here, Like, I literally read every single Star Wars book that exists, and that trend continued onward until around the time that I'm talking about right now. And at one point, I was like, man, I have 30 Star Wars books. I read all of these. I was buying them when they came out every month. And I was like, the series ended. And I was like, what am I going to do with these? They're like filling up my shelf. Like, I don't need them. And I was like, I'll sell them on eBay. And I listed them for a penny, starting at a penny. And I was really surprised because the auction ended at a price that was like 75% of what I had paid retail. And it kind of blew me away because I never saw there as being value in books. So that was when I first realized that books were worth money in a resale platform. Fast forward a few years, I moved my family back to California, and my daughter went to the same kindergarten that I went to, actually. And so I continued my hustle on eBay, just selling random stuff. I wasn't making much money, maybe like $500 a month. My wife was working as a CNA. We were getting by. We would get assistance from churches here and there. We were still on food stamps and Medicare, and it was all right. I wasn't super ambitious. And then what happened was I would be going around to thrift stores to buy stuff, and I would occasionally see people looking at the books. And I knew they were sellers just because you can tell when you do this, who the sellers are, especially when you see them regularly. And what really caught my attention was that they were using laser beams, barcode scanners to scan the books. And I'm technology minded. So I was like, wow, like the first thing I thought was those things can't be cheap. They got to be $100 to $300. So they got to be making money because they have made an investment on this business, And this was before the iPhone even came out, pre-YouTube. This was like 14, 15 years ago. And so I tried doing research. I tried to figure out how they were doing it, and I really couldn't figure it out. There wasn't any, like I said, YouTube wasn't out. There wasn't any books written about it yet. There was certainly no YouTubers helping people or anything. And so I just hit Google as hard as I could, and I wasn't coming up with anything. And so what I would do was I would just pester the hell out of anybody doing it when I saw them. And what drove me to want to figure it out even more is the way they reacted. They really clammed up and like acted like you've never seen anyone act this weird in your life when you're like, hey, what are you doing? And, they would pretend like they don't hear you. So imagine 40-year-old, 50-year-old, full-grown adults pretending like they don't hear you. And you're like, I know you hear me. Like, what are you doing? And so, but I didn't give up. And eventually I seen an old lady scanning books, and I was like, wow, she's like 70 and she's doing it. And I was like, hey, ma'am, like the same thing I ask everyone, like, what are you doing? What app are you using? And it wasn't even, there was no apps yet because there wasn't really a smartphone yet. And so I was like, what are you using on your device? You know, it was a Dell Axum Pocket PC running like some form of Windows on a Pocket PC. And she told me the name of the software. And from there, you know, I went home, I looked that up, and I found all the information I needed to find. I found out it was called Book Scouting. I found out they were selling them on Amazon, which I had never even used Amazon and barely heard of it at the time. And so from there, you know, I purchased my own devices off of Craigslist. I installed the software, and I started going to Goodwills and more thrift stores, anywhere that had books, and just in yard sales and just scanning books. And I started to do really well. I was like really surprised. You know, I was buying books for a quarter and they were selling for 25, 50 bucks, $100, and it was really insane. At the time I was working at a skate shop making $18,000 a year, which is actually the last job I ever had before I started working for myself. And I would you know, I would go in the morning. I had to restructure my schedule so that I came in like at noon at the skate shop. I would go out in the mornings and look for books, and then I would come in and do an 8-hour retail shift. And in my first year, I did over 100,000 in sales of used books. Wow. Just me and my wife in a 2-bedroom apartment, and like it looked like the Library of Congress. We had books everywhere, and we had got so inundated. We were wrapping like 100 orders a day during textbook season, which is when kids are buying books to go back to school. And it was insane. So I had hired a friend to help me wrap orders. And I'm still working at the skate shop. And one day my boss just flipped out on me. And I was like, you know what? Like F you. Like, I don't need this. You know what I mean? Like, I can do this, you know? And, you know, fast forward to where I am now. We did 866,000 in 2017 on used books.
Wow.
I have a business partner now. It's actually my best friend from high school. So about 6 or 7 years ago, we partnered, and a couple years before that, he started doing it too, and it worked out really well. And we work well together, and we're good friends. And so we actually just, you know, formed like Voltron and put our forces together. And it's been really great. So that's pretty much the story. What happened after that was about two and a half years ago, I found a book one day at the Goodwill called Crush It. And I'm looking at it, and it's really weird because it's green and black, which reminds me of money.
Yep.
And then I still read a lot of books at the time, and on the back there was a foreword by Tony Hsieh, which is the CEO of Zappos, and I had just read the Zappos book Delivering Happiness, which is a fucking killer book if you haven't read it. Yep. And so I was like, wow, like this is cool. And then it's called Crush It, and it's like has like a youthful title, like who's gonna name their book Crush It? Like they're not a square, you know?
Yeah.
And so I scanned it. It wasn't worth any money, but I was like, you know what? I'm gonna check this one out. Especially, you know, it's like how to chase your passion and follow your dreams. And so I read it, and it blew my mind, and I realized I wasn't using social media for the right reasons or in the right way. I was using it, you know, in a total consumer way. I wasn't getting any value out of it. People were extracting value out of me, really. You know, I would just, you know, typical shit like take a picture of your dinner and share it with your friends or whatever. And so after that, I started doing Facebook and YouTube, and it kind of blew up. I started teaching people how to do what I do once I realized that that's what other people were doing, and then I could leverage that to build a personal brand. And it started out, I just wanted to do YouTube for myself and, you know, potentially make some money off of it. And I knew that I was better at speaking than these other people that were doing it. I was younger. I could relate to people more. And so that's pretty much what I started doing. My Facebook group now has 16,000 members. Wow. My YouTube has 24,000 subscribers. It's not growing as fast as I would like, but it's weird. I think a lot of people in this niche, they want kind of that dry, monotone, you know, here's information, here's how you do it. And I don't exactly want to deliver my information that way, nor get put into that box, you know? So it is what it is. Instagram is going really good, but I'm helping people. I didn't realize how much I would love helping people, and that pretty much changed my life. So Gary Vee did the 2017 Flip Challenge, started that last year, and he actually used some of my videos in his videos for that, and like shouted me out, put my Twitter handle on the screen, and that of course gave me a little boost. But pretty regularly now, like every day, I'm getting messages from people that are telling me how I changed their life or how I helped them quit their 9-to-5 job and now they can spend more time with their kids, or like a DM from a video from a family. They're like, Reezy, we're in Disneyland today, you know, with the kids, and we couldn't have did it without you. and it kind of blows my mind. I was just at Disneyland, which by the way is something that I never got to do as a kid, and we now have annual passes. But I'm at Disneyland, and like some people just walk by and they're like, are you Reezy? And I'm like, yeah, what's up? And they're like, dude, you saved our life. And I'm like, well, what happened? And I guess dude had been, the husband and wife, the husband had been driving a truck driving job for over 10 years, hurt his back on the job, and they didn't give him workers' comp, and they fired him, no severance, nothing. And he just happened to stumble across one of my videos, and now he's doing books for a little over a year full time, did over 100,000 in his first year. And, you know, like their family, they literally said, like, our family is thriving today because of your videos. And like, I almost cried. But it's just insane how much that pumps me up. And like, when I was a kid, I was told, you know, you could change the world, like, go get him, Tiger. And it's like, I was super jaded as a kid. Like, I lived in a hotel. I was on food stamps, you know, like I went to bed hungry sometimes. And I was like, what do you mean I could like, how? You know, there was no real actionable advice in that. And now I know how you can, and how, you know, one person can like fully make a difference in the world through social media. And so aside from teaching people how to, you know, quit their 9-to-5 or make money selling online, I also, you know, teach people how to use social media and how they should be building a personal brand, because it really is your business card in, you know, in today's sense. And there's never been we've never had this opportunity, and who knows how long, you know, I feel like we're in a bubble of the personal brand right now. And, you know, in the next 10, 15 years, it's going to be much harder to build a personal brand when everybody's doing it, you know. People will be more numb to it, right? And so, you know, maybe we'll be in VR in 10 years and it won't be face to face, like my eyeballs to your eyeballs, which will make it a lot harder for the salesman people to win this thing. It will be, you know, the VR people that know how to make good polygon models or whatever. They're going to win, and we're going to be walking around looking like stick figures unless we buy our VR models from them or whatever, you know. So right now it's face to face, it's eyes to eyes. Like, if you can speak to people, you know, you can develop a personal brand, and it's just pretty insane. But yeah, that's pretty much my story. I don't know how much more I can go into it.
Dude, I love it, man. And so here's what I'll say. I personally just get so much joy out of hearing someone speak with passion about what they do. And normally this podcast is very different. It's like, and I even told you, it's like 2-minute intro, and we just went for like 18 minutes. But you know what? Like, I just love the fact that you're so passionate about what you're doing. Like, it just flows from you. And I appreciate that, in that this format on this podcast is going to be a little bit different, because as you were talking, I was making a note here, asking about this, talk about this. And then as you kept talking, you literally hit every single point that I was going to ask you about and talk to you about. Because, man, I'm a big Gary Vee guy. And so I was just like, I was going to ask you about the Flip Challenge. I was going to ask you about this and that. But, man, your story, I think, is perfect for everyone to hear, especially on this type of a short podcast, because everyone has been told a million times, like, you don't have to have money to make money, that you can get started with what you've got, that, you know, what do you have laying around your house that you don't need? And everyone forgets little small nuances of what you just said. Like, everyone forgets that freaking Amazon was a book company basically in the beginning. Like, they sold books. And
yeah, I forgot to mention one part, which I think is pretty crucial, because a lot of people say, they don't have any money to start. And so I didn't really have any money to start. Like I said, I was barely making the money that would, like grocery money on a good month. Right.
Yep.
And so when I found out about the books, I needed, I found good supply and sources. I just needed more money so I could buy more books.
Yep.
And books don't sell right away. It's not, you buy it for a quarter, sell it for 100, but it might take 3 months to sell, maybe 6 months. Okay. But it doesn't matter if you buy 100 every day, right? It snowballs.
Sure.
So what I actually did, which I'm not saying I recommend it, but I just like to tell people to illustrate, like, if you want it, you can do it and figure out a way. I realized, I was like, what are we spending all our money on? Okay, rent, bills, and food. And I was like, how can we cut any of those, And I'm like, well, okay, we can cut the cable off, like we can't cut the internet off. And I was like, well, and we can't, negotiate for cheaper rent. And I was like, well, how can we cut our food bill? And we had already been getting food from from churches here and there. And we were on food stamps, but it wasn't really enough to cover what we needed. Right.
Yep.
And so what I proposed to my wife was like, look, babe, let's eat one meal a day at the homeless shelter for a month.
Wow.
And if we do that, I think we can save like $500 a month, and that will get me going. Like, let's just do it for 1 month. And growing up, I was familiar with the homeless shelter. So even when I wasn't homeless, we would eat there to save money. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't that weird to me, right? It was like, yeah, just go in, get your food, and get out. You don't have to hang around.
Yep.
And so we did that for a month, and that, my wife, bless her soul, she deals with me and my crazy ideas. And that's what we did, and that's how we got the business rolling. So, there's a million ways to get started.
I appreciate you saying that, and because you always hear Gary talk about people taking a step back to take 2 steps forward, and that some people just need to go humble for a couple of years and cut their expenses and take that money and allocate it somewhere else to build a business. But I mean, you took that from the very beginning. I mean, he's talking about people that, aren't going to buy a boat this year when they normally would have. And you're like, we literally went to a homeless shelter and ate food. Like, dude, that's incredible. But that's the stories that people need to hear. Like, those are the vulnerable stories that people need to hear and need to hear the other side of it, because it's one thing to be sitting at that situation considering that. It's one thing to hear somebody that did it, but then now they're on the other side of it and saying, thank God I had the ability, or I had the intestinal fortitude to humble myself and do that. And look what we have now, dude. I have so much respect for that. Man, I wish we could go on back and forth. I know you got somewhere you need to go, and I got somewhere I need to go. I do want to ask you one question real quick before we get off of here. What is one thing right now, like with the success that you've had, what's one misconception people may have about Reezy that you'd like to set straight?
I'd say the biggest misconception is that people assume that I'm rich, or even my grandma, she was like, oh, you're a millionaire, grandson. And like, it's not like we talk all the time, but she probably saw something I posted or whatever. And a lot of people, especially if you're not in business, you don't understand that if you sell $1 million worth of gross sales, it doesn't make you a millionaire, So just because I did $865,000 in sales last year, it doesn't mean I have $865,000. I have a business partner. We have some employees. There's overhead. Amazon takes at least 30% of our gross revenue goes to Amazon fees, and that's before paying employees or overhead. So I pay myself a $75,000 a year salary, which is not exorbitant by any means, especially living where I live, which is one of the most expensive places to live in the United States. But coming from where I came from, I feel super rich. I own my own time.
Absolutely.
I make more than anyone in my family ever made. My kids are going to graduate from college, or at least my 17-year-old right now. My 5-year-old, I don't know if college will be around or whatever. But so it's, you can get what you want out of this business. You can grow it. You can grow it much bigger. You can have a side hustle. But I just want people to know that there's more to life than money. You know, I personally would rather be happier and make half as much money than be less happy and make twice as much money. Like, I get this question all the time. How come, wow, you pay that much for rent or like whatever? Like, why don't you, like where I live, I bought land, built a house, built a warehouse and back, and like the amount they say wouldn't even get me a down payment on a house in California.
Yep.
And they're like, you should move to Indiana or Georgia, wherever. And to me, that's not what it is. For me, the weather like really makes me happy, having good weather all year round. And I'd rather live in California and be happy than, and maybe that's something I learned growing up here or whatever. But everybody has different wants and different needs, different financial thermostats. And yeah, I'm kind of running on with this one, but
no, that's the perfect answer. That's the perfect way to close this thing out, because again, obviously you just took the most humble route humanly possible by saying like, okay, I just threw out this big number, but here's what that really means, because somebody's listening to this and they're saying like, well, crap, now I can go out and I can do this and I can make X amount of money, but they need to know what to expect. Like, they need to know where to set goals. And so many times in my business, we own an insurance company, and people will come in. I'll say, how much money do you want to make? And they'll be like, 900,000 this year. And I'm like, okay, well, let's break that down. And what does that mean you're going to have to do on a daily basis? And it's just unrealistic. And so you just told them the truth. Like, more people need to be telling the actual truth, because there's way too many people right now sitting on a stage claiming to be an expert, claiming to have a certain amount of revenue that they're generating, but they're banking that revenue number and hoping that it masks the actual reality of the amount of debt that they have, the amount of overhead that they have on a monthly basis, and they're really not making any money. But they can sit up on stage and look like the expert and get followers on Instagram, but they're not actually making any money. But I love what you said. That you said, look, like I'm happy. Like, and Gary talks about it all the time. Like, you could be happy making 75, or you could be miserable making 87. I think it's a much better trade on your time and your effort to be extremely happy, living where you want to live, doing what you want to do. Right.
Right. The cool thing is that you can scale and you can grow and you can afford yourself the opportunity to do different stuff. So now I'm doing social media and I have income coming in from that. It's taken me 2 years to get to where I'm at, and I'm sure others are doing better or whatever, but I'm making double what I used to make at the last job. I make over 30 grand a year off of social media in all the various forms.
Awesome.
And that's awesome. That's like really, really fun for me. Like, I could do it for 24 hours a day and it wouldn't feel like work ever.
Yep.
I'm providing value. I'm helping people. And that's insane to me. And that was only able to happen because I afforded myself the luxury of owning my own time. Because, so it's not just the income from my business. I also own my own time, which is infinitely valuable, because who knows what you could do with your time and what it could produce.
Absolutely.
So whether you want to, free your time up so you can spend more time with your kids, or so that you can do social media. And that's kind of what I figured out. I was like, look, you can buy and sell crap off of Craigslist, eBay, Amazon, whatever, and you could pursue that full time and 16 hours a day if you want and do 10 million a year, or you could maybe do 100,000 a year, and then you can pursue social media or whatever. There's just so many options. Like, we're super lucky to live in this country, to have, a homeless shelter that has free food for anybody that walks in every day of the year. A lot of people don't have that in their country. And so I just think it's like the American dream is like super strong.
Absolutely, man. Hey, so tell everybody where they can find you online.
You can find me on YouTube. Everything that I have is Reezy Resells, Reezy Resells, Resells. You can go to Reezy.live, which goes straight to my YouTube. Instagram, I'm really heavy on Instagram. I'm building up my Twitter. I do a little bit of Anchor and some Snapchat. But if you guys need any help with any of this stuff, watch some of my videos, shoot me a message, and I would love to help you guys out.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you being on. I appreciate you being transparent and telling the real story, because that's the only kind of people I want on this podcast, are people that are transparent, are actually giving you the real story, and are actually providing value to this world, man. So I appreciate you being on. And with that, guys, that is the BreadWinner podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Harris. And if you have not done so yet, please go to iTunes, subscribe the BreadWinner podcast, and make sure that you leave a review when you do. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the BreadWinner podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating on iTunes for a chance to be on the show. Send a screenshot of your iTunes rating to @TylerHarris page on Instagram, where he'll pick one person every single week. See you next time on the BreadWinner podcast.